My name is Jasmina Cibic. I'm a Slovenian artist and I've been based in London for 20 years. My art practice has been evolving around notions of soft power for the majority of my creative practice. So I'm interested in how culture and national, supranational powers relate through history. The exhibition that is presented here is a culmination of a very long project that we have been working on for over 3 years with a number of European institutions. At its center is The Gift, a film that has been looking at the idea of culture as a gift to a notion of a divided nation. So somehow I would say also at the Palace, at this exhibition, this is the central work from which then other rooms, other strata of the project develop from. The Gift, the film, is shot entirely within architectures that were all gifts. The storyline of the film is quite simple. It's a story of 4 fundamental freedoms who organize a competition to find the gift to unite a divided nation. They call upon 3 allegories, 3 men. These are the 3 gifts of art, music, and architecture. And these 3 men present their monologues in the film, where they argue what their vision of a perfect culture as this idea of this uniting agent is. The entirety of the dialogues is based also on archives, so the speeches that the 3 gifts present are drawn from transcripts, letters, and other just archival debris of sort of European diplomacy that was trying to step in line and hand in hand with culture historically. The first room you encounter after the film is a room that presents a performative installation with 3 hammocks, where for the opening of the exhibition we had a special performance with 3 soprano singers. So this is an installation which effectively took this concept of a gift of music and expanded it into a new artwork. This was a performance on which I collaborated with Barbara Kinga-Majewska, and we together created a new sound score. So Barbara worked on the score and it was based on an archive from the League of Nations. This is an archive of donations of musical scores to the building. So when we were doing the research for the film, we uncovered this wonderful archive of musical scores which were never realized. So these were musical scores notations by Sunday composers, if you want, so not particularly skilled musicians. But the idea was that they were donating and sending in these musical scores to the palace when it was shut. So the Palace of Nations managed to somehow reopen literally on the eve of the Second World War, which the League of Nations was supposedly stopping. So this act of artists and also amateur artists sending in these gifts of music to this locked up palace was very not only poetic, but I found it also an extremely strong metaphor for our current political and social situation. So we found one score that had effectively a ghost voice. So we decided to work with that. And this was a score which in itself was not extremely amazing, but this missing space, this ghost voice within it, somehow started to offer us this metaphor of this lacking female voice from nation building throughout the entirety of the 20th century. So this is what we decided to play with. The words that accompany the melody are drawn from, again, from transcripts, from political discussions on the purpose of art and on this double game that politics always played with. The second performance within the space is a performance by two female percussionists that takes on the story of the other set of donations that we uncovered in the archive of the United Nations. This is a performance where two percussionists exchange looped rhythms that are again based on these donations. But it also is a performance which connects to the other set of donations apart from the musical scores, and that was a set of donations of potential flags for the League of Nations. Also in the archives in Geneva we found this incredible folder of flags, or the propositions for the flag for the League of Nations. As the musical scores, also with the flags, nothing was selected because of the fear of nationalism in design in the 1930s. So these potential flags, so the League of Nations never had an official flag, but these potentials somehow were, again, a really interesting metaphor to see what happens with branding and with these sort of aesthetic spaces. And would the League of Nations have survived if it decided different things? Of course, it's all just propositions and metaphors and play with history, but I think that this is where art comes in because it can work with archives in a different way than a historian would. The two drummers present a performance which is a looped replay of hymns and marches. So these donations to the League were effectively only two types of music. They were hymns, anthems and marches. So it kind of felt like a really nice metaphor to play with, as in you invent a new ideology or a new state, you need an anthem. When that one dies and it goes to war, you need a march. So these two propositions are exchanging here, and again, with using the female presence within the performance, we really wanted to bring back the completely silenced female voice from all this historical nation building. The last element of the exhibition is a series of, let's call them Vanitas Portraits, of a selection of gifts from three different collections in the European space. Each of these collections speaks of a completely different starting point, but they unite in this idea of culture really becoming this mechanism of tying up the society, the citizen, and the state power. The first group is a series of relays that comes from the Museum of Yugoslav History in Belgrade. And these were effectively relay sculptures that were made by artists in former Yugoslavia, which were then utilized in this very famous race that connected the six republics, its citizens, and it culminated in this very symbolic gifting of the relay to President Tito. And this relay race is a very interesting historical document of this sort of Yugoslav diplomacy and its relationship to culture, employment of artists, and the relationship to the general population. And effectively, we can really read it as almost like a kind of needle sewing through the fabric or the body of this federal state, which had to unite so many different cultures, languages and religions. The second set within the same body of work is a series of portraits of roses which are named after the founding fathers of European Union. So again, they're portrayed as vanitas, so they are populated by creepy crawlers, night creatures, moths, slugs, and so on. As is the nature of Vanitas, it's there to remind us of this potential passing of an idea of solidarity. So this was the kind of formal choice that also guided then the aesthetics. And the roses themselves have always been tied to political power. So it was Josephine, so Napoleon's Josephine, who was the first one that actually worked with her gardener to create the first hybrids, so the first cross-pollination of roses. So I really wanted to trace this idea of the naming of the rose to contemporary times and of its tie with political power. And this was a project that coincided with the first wave of the pandemic. And we were looking for the roses that were named after politicians who were the first to announce an idea of a European project. So as we had the League of Nations as the first attempt of transnational solidarity and also transnationalism in Europe, somehow this idea of Europe was then the second, or the European Union as well. So again, you know, it's very different spaces, as I said before, but somehow they unite in this idea of transnationalism. The roses you see in the exhibition are named after Sandro Pertini, Helmut Kohl, Konrad Adenauer, there's de Gaulle, there is Winston Churchill. So all dead white men, but all men who were arguing for this first idea of Europe. We have again this lack of female presence, but it's somehow kind of mirrored in the concept of, or the idea of the rose itself as well, and the rose of Europe, which is again one of the roses that we have. So to give a name is of course to give love. So again, we're back with gifting, back with the idea of how all these retribution gifts then function. So when you give a gift, that gift has to be returned, otherwise it ceases to be a gift. So this idea of the retribution gift then brings us to the third part of this series, and that is the portraits of the revolutionary artists. And this brings us to the collection of the Muzeum Sztuki in Łódź. So the collection of the revolutionary artists and this concept of the gift of the artist to an institution to formulate this international collection of avant-garde art. And when we started working with the curators, I really wanted to find a context-specific part of this project. So of course we had the part of filming in Warsaw, but I really wanted to connect with the museum itself, so the palace itself, which was obviously, of course, also a gift. And this idea of looking in depth at the revolutionary artists and at these paintings initially started with, let's look at the backs and let's see what the backs of the paintings tell us about the gift, about this retribution gift. Because the backs of paintings have the stickers, they have this evidence of all the exhibitions where these works went. So it's a really wonderful illustration of this circulation of the gift economy. Again, they're populated by moths, just as a warning to all of us cultural producers and audiences, of how much is at stake if this connection between culture, spectatorship, and political power is lost.